Welcome to Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism in Modern Life, hosted by Adam Piercy and Mick Mulroy. Welcome back to Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism. I'm your host, Adam Piercy, with my co-host, Mick Mulroy. Today, we're going to jump into it because it's a fairly big topic with things going on in the world right now. And that topic is colonialism. And I wanted to open directly with a prompt today of sort of the dictionary definition of colonialism. So colonialism is a system or policy by which a nation maintains or advocates control or influence of a dependent country, territory, or people. And Mick, I think you're probably best poised to set up, as we get into the discussion. But I think, colonialism today, it's a word that feels old, right? It's a word that feels like it's from the past. We are modern now. We're a global, we have the United Nations. We're a global citizenry. But it seems to be coming back to the fore again, and maybe never left. So, but yeah,
Yes.
Colonialism today is a Stoic take on this one.
That's right.
So,
That's right. Neocolonialism, but we're talking about all of it, right? And it is a current event. We talked about doing this episode yesterday. I think it was yesterday, right?
yeah.
Because I was up from 1 a.m. on.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm dressed like I am now is going on right after this to yap about Venezuela.
Mm-hmm.
The issue, of course, isn't the capture of an indicted criminal. It isn't the military operation. We've talked about that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about what came afterward at the press conference when the President of the United States said the United States was going to take over, essentially running Venezuela, and we were going to take the oil. So this the purpose of saying that isn't necessarily to get into argument about, not that we would argue, but to debate the current Venezuela
Right.
issue. It is a trend that we're seeing around the world that
Mm-hmm.
we've seen throughout history of countries, particularly advanced countries, who are looking for economic opportunities. And instead of, helping develop a country, and that's what US aid did, for example,
Yeah.
before we shut it down, so that they can build their own economy and eventually become trading partners with the industrialized world and the most wealthy countries. They simply go there and exploit the natural resources for their
Yeah.
own gain. They essentially keep the country itself in a position that they can't develop too far because then they won't allow for the exploitation. And they're okay, for example, with dictators as long as the dictators are down with the exploitation, right?
Right. Yeah.
Because a democratic country might say, hey, why do you guys get to take all our stuff? And it doesn't really benefit the people that live here.
Right.
So I think that is also something that we have seen throughout history. I obviously did some prep for this, but I think we all are familiar. 14th century Spain, Portugal arrives in South and Central America, particularly since we're talking about that now.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, if you look at colonialism, it's a country that has some form of supremacy, some real, some imagined. And what I mean by that is some kind of advanced technology, right? You can sail to them. You have
Yeah.
muskets and cannons and things. So
Right.
that's real. It's supreme technology.
Yeah.
And then the imagined is that they just assume their culture is better than all these other cultures around the room, all around the
Yeah.
world. So they need to. It's like a benevolent thing to, you know, civilize the savages or what have you. But it isn't even really about that. It's about economic exploitation. It's about
Yeah.
something they have that you want. And then the consequences, and we saw the scramble for Africa, for example. If you keep going on in time, where
Yeah.
people, where the colonial parties, are not parties, the countries, all of which are European, of course,
Yeah. That's right.
Spain, Portugal, France, Germany,
Belgium,
Dutch, Belgium,
you know,
obviously the UK, the biggest colonial power
sure,
in the history of the world,
absolutely,
right?
yeah,
And we're two examples of it right here.
yeah,
Um, and then it went on, and then you look at all the problems that come from that. The imperial cartography is what the word that they used when I was reading it today, which meant they simply carved up parts of Africa, for example, in the Middle East, based on resources and dealing with other colonial powers. Like it had
that's
nothing to
right.
do with the people on the ground. So, ethnic, tribal, cultural didn't matter. Like the
Didn't
people
matter.
that
No, no,
didn't matter. It simply didn't matter.
yeah,
It was
that's right.
okay. We'll take this, and you can take that. This got this resource that. So we'll just make this a country. And then,
And all of
by
a
the
sudden, there's a
way,
line on a map, right? There's just a
yeah,
line on a map all of a sudden one day
yeah,
from a
it's just
bunch
a
of
line
white
on the
guys,
map that
from a
goes
bunch
like
of
right
white guys.
down this, right in the middle of a
I
tribe,
know.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Or like take the Kurds for example. There's about 25 to 30 million Kurds. They don't have a country. They're literally spread from Turkey to Syria to Iraq to Iran,
mhm,
and I don't know how you make a country out of that, but and I have a lot of Kurdish friends for full disclosure. But the point being is, it was not it was done for the purposes of the colonial powers, right?
right, yeah,
And and then when it was determined, hey, we're not making any money off this, but also like the whole economic infrastructure was for what they wanted, right? So if you
yes,
go to, and I lived in Africa for 5 6 years in multiple different places, a lot of the infrastructure was for whatever they wanted, but nothing else. Like I didn't like the substance you want is here. The way you ship it to your country is here. So, ports. So there's a railroad from A to B, right? And that's
yeah,
it. Like it wasn't about developing a comprehensive economy and a democratic system. It was about one guy in charge that do what you tell him to do. And
mhm,
so, and I think it went away for a time because it just wasn't economically viable after World War II. So if you look
right,
at all the independent states, particularly from independence from uh, uh, Great Britain, um, it happens like 1946, 1947, 1948, 1949.
yeah,
And as a diplomat, I had to go to all these independence parties, right?
yeah,
And it was always from the UK, and it was always in the date was always right.
yeah,
But now it's coming back. It's coming back. The
yeah,
rare
it is,
earth minerals is like the key talking point in national security
mhm,
analyst types like myself. Not talking point, but it's one of the things that seems to drive diplomatic, military, and intelligence engagements around the world right now. It's going back to that, right? We
yeah,
stopped and paused with Ukraine being attacked and say, hey, we'll help you, but you have to sign over your rare earth minerals, right? Which, by the way, are under the occupied Russian territory. So uh, that's another story there.
yeah,
But the point being is it's coming back. So I think it's a good time to highlight for those people who adhere to the Stoic philosophy just
mhm,
how counter that philosophy would be to the belief that you are supreme. Look at Zeno's Public, and one of the main
yeah,
points was equality. And
yes,
logos, everybody has it, and everybody has the right to use it. Right? Reason.
yes,
And I'll stop here, but I know you have probably the same list. Cosmopolitanism, which doesn't
yes,
mean a universal one government. In my view, it means
no,
respect for cultures around the world,
yeah,
and that people are not there to be exploited. And we didn't even talk about the 12 million people that were taken. Well, I haven't. 12 million people that were taken out of Africa to be slaves. So it wasn't just
right,
exploitation of resources; it was a
right,
exploitation of
people,
people,
human
right?
beings, yeah,
Which is obviously the opposite of what cosmopolitan is. And the two other things I would highlight that Stoicism would push back on all of this would be putting economic wealth as a key driving factor for your life, either as a person or as a country. Right? I
yeah,
understand we want to be wealthy, and I'm all about that, and I'm a free market, right of center guy. But it ain't everything, and it certainly isn't worth giving up your morals, enslaving
well,
people,
absolutely,
and
absolutely,
and then
I
justice would
think.
be the last one, and then
Oh,
I'll leave it.
justice is a great one.
Yeah,
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 well, let's look at justice then. I think, there's the, as a, interestingly, I'm a left of center person, and I will casually say to people like, "Well, I'm a socialist because I like trains and I like universal health care," right? But in reality, I'm a social capitalist. I don't believe that it's that like I'm not a communist. I think that gets thrown around, but there's this idea of just like a greater good, like doing things for the betterment of all type of thing. But when we talk about justice, this is something that I think really comes is prevalent during this huge rise of colonialism, sort of 14th century through to the 20th, where there's this big concept of race and colonial rule in that, right?
Yes, the
Which is a much
supremacy fallacy. Yeah.
Yes, this idea you sort of have to subjugate the savages. You have to make the savages' lives better. And I'm always like, I don't really know that anybody can say that, right? If you look upon people with justice, with magnanimity and benevolence, then you are understanding that you are all human beings. You are understanding that you are all like that, right? So there's an equality there that I think you lose when you look at yourself as better than somebody else. And it is and that is definitely anti-stoic, I would say, in terms of its philosophy, just from the baseline definition of the justice that we look at. To
Hmm.
treat them with justice and benevolence is in many ways to for me to accept them as they are. But I think that gets lost. Let's talk a little bit about the history, though, because I think there's an important thing to talk about here, right? Because I have heard some people that you know, even friends of mine, where they're like, "Man, like big day today, I never thought this could happen," and I'm always like, "Well, this is not a new thing.
Right.
It's been going on for a really long time, and I think there are some specific historic examples of Stoics that have been in one or two or many of these situations and have done things. So whenever I think of this, I always think of two people. I always think of Cato the Younger, who was very
Yep.
famous, and I would like to do an episode on Cato, in the same way we
Absolutely.
did an episode
The
on Zeno.
quintessential Stoic soldier.
Yes, quintessential pain in the ass as well.
Hmm.
But Cato very famously, right? He opposed Caesar and Julius Caesar, Gaius Julius Caesar. And the thing about Caesar was that um, Cato was worried that he was going to be a tyrant, but it was actually earlier in his career, before going into the tyrannical phase, before looking at the imperator title and stuff like that. Cato was opposing Caesar because of his expansionist wars, like in Gaul and Britain, and it's famously known. Like Cato was calling out Caesar's war crimes because Cato is sort of of the same. Well, Cato is a Stoic, and Cato is on the same mindset as so many of us Stoics, which is like along this justice side. You kind of go, look, I can't how can you rationalize this? You are decimating these Gallic tribes. You are decimating, you are taking this over from people and things like that. And he called out those war crimes and military expeditions. And that sort of set the stage for later because I don't think Caesar and Cato ever really liked each other. I know Caesar went to pardon Cato after
Yeah.
he defeated
He
him. It was a
respected
couple.
him. That's interesting. Shows some
Yeah, I think he
character.
respected
Right.
him. Yes, but I think at the end of the day, I don't think they were having tea. Let's put it that way. But I think,
Right.
when you look at Cato, excuse me, it's very dry here. It's -2 Celsius here in Canada, so it's
Hmm.
very dry here. Um, when you look at Cato, when you look at those circumstances, you realize that the one thing for certain I would say is you can't sort of hypocritize. You can't be a hypocrite in this circumstance. You can't be a Republican and want. This is in Rome. You can't be a Republican and want. Um, a democratic or republican style of legislature, and then go into these places, take them over, and impose yourself upon them. Like, it takes that kind of a way. And
Yeah.
Cato definitely is, I think, on the side of the line where he goes like, this isn't right. And then the other
Yeah.
one I'll just quickly say from a historical perspective is Marcus Aurelius. And we always talk about Marcus, but what we tend to do is we focus on the meditations and whatnot, but looking at him as an actual leader, right? So he has two major wars that most people talk about with regards to like expansion and things like that. And interestingly, during Marcus' reign, he never actually expanded the empire. He had plans to maybe do that with some land he gathered during one of the wars, but the basic war history for him, in terms of the context that I want to share here, is there's two wars: the Parthian War, where it was actually fought with his co-emperor Lucius Verus, And that Parthian War, he consolidated but had no new provinces. And then the other one, the one that it's the one that I always feel the most connected to, is the Marcomannic War, which is a war against a tribe
Yeah.
called the Marcomanni, and that takes place along the Danube, in sort of Austria, Czech Republic area. And
Hmm.
it's famous. That war is very famous because Marcus writes books of the Meditations at Carnuntum, which is like it's actually a walled city, like on the
Yep.
Danube or near the Danube.
It's still there. Is it
And
still a walled city there?
yes, actually, I've been
Oh,
there.
okay.
Donald Robertson and I were there when he was doing press for How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, and I did. I was his videographer, and I did that. I was with him for a week
So
there.
it's the same structure from when Marcus was there?
Well, so that what they did was the it's a bit like Pompeii or Herculaneum. So it's
Yeah.
a good chunk of the city is still ruin, but they've rebuilt the bathhouse and a couple of the Roman houses back to what they would have been like at Roman times. So the bathhouse actually still works. It's full. It's a full one. It has the tepidarium, caldarium, frigidarium, all of those things. It's really
Okay.
neat, actually. Like Mick and I are gonna go. Mick and I are gonna road trip to Carnuntum.
Heck
Maybe
yeah.
that's something we should do. Yeah,
We're,
yeah. I'll
yeah.
tell you about.
We're
I'll
going to
tell you
come
about.
back to that.
Yeah. So, but anyway, so when he's in Carnuntum, he writes these books. But the thing is the Marcomannic Wars are ones where he was repelling invaders. He forged new treaties with the Marcomanni because he
Right.
was like, look, I don't need anything more. And it's interesting because he talks about that in his writings a little bit. His writings are funny because he never just says like, today I fought the Marcomanni and then I did this. He doesn't say that, but you get from his writings from that time period that he was trying to have some magnanimity, right? Like, sure, they were invading. That was bad. He pushed them back. He pushed them across the Danube. Actually, in the winter, he fought on the Danube on the ice, pushed them back,
Hmm.
took over new lands. But then he said, look, we're done. Treaty, stop, over. Because he's like, the Roman Empire is already huge. Like, I'm not going to impose myself on these people. And it's actually better for us if we can get a treaty going and they can look after themselves. And it's interesting because so many, you and I had an episode on militarism and stoicism, or sorry, stoicism in the military, I should say.
Yep.
And interest, like, we'll fight. Like if I had been Marcus, I'd have picked up arms too if we were getting invaded and whatnot. But Marcus, as the most powerful person, could have kept going, right? He could have added 10 new provinces, maybe, or whatever it
Yep.
is. He decided
Yep.
not to. And I think that's an important thing here, right? He's going, look, I don't need to do that. And so those are two examples I think to kind of talk about here, because this is not a new thing, right? This is not new. I mean, look, even if we go as far back as Athens and the time of Socrates,
Hmm.
and actually Donald Robertson has this in his book, like How to Think Like Socrates, right? Athens had colonies in, I
Yep.
believe it was
So did
Salerno,
Sparta. So did
right?
Sparta.
And
Sparta
so
had
did Sparta, right? And so then
Sicily.
and then they get into this whole back and forth of like, well, who's ruling this and whatnot, and then it starts, and eventually you end up
It's
with,
part of human nature. There's no doubt about it. It's
yes,
existed and probably will continue to exist. But
absolutely.
so is crime, right? Doesn't mean it, you know,
Right. And so I
we should
think,
accept
there
it
are
as is.
absolutely. And I think there are historic examples, though, that we can talk about here. I will always, people say it's Herodotus. I don't know that it's Herodotus, but there's always that phrasing, right? Which is, he who chooses to ignore history is doomed to repeat it. And I, for one, am a student of history. So, but
Hmm.
it is what it is. So,
Yes. And I would like to point out, since she won our first Rufus Award and only,
yes.
that the way this could have gone, to pop back to current times,
Yeah. Yeah.
is U.S. could have removed an indicted war criminal who
Right.
wasn't legitimate and somehow took a country who has $17 trillion oil reserves and still can't feed his own people. They
Right.
could transition to, there's already an elected person, right? So
Yes.
Machado stand in, because she wasn't allowed to run,
Right.
won by
Hmm.
70% of the vote,
Yeah.
which is a lot in modern democracies. We could just have that person come back and then have a interim government until there's a free and fair election, right? So I'm highlighting her because we've already highlighted her before, and somehow after all of this, she's just been shoved to the side.
Hmm.
So that is colonialism, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. When we whoever the colonial power is, they don't really want a democratically elected independent government in the place that has the resources that they want, right?
Right.
Think about it. I mean, if you were just looking at it from their perspective, not caring about the advancement of the society of which you're exploiting. You just want one person that has complete control of the country.
Yeah.
And in democratic countries, that's generally not the case. And in democratic countries, those people might be voted out of office next election. Dictators
Right.
last forever.
Right.
Dictators don't care about other people's opinions or rights. So colonialism is also counter democratic, counter human rights, individual liberties. It has
Yeah.
to be effective. You see what I mean?
I, I
Or
do. I do.
most effective.
Absolutely, and I think it has to be. It has to be, doing that to be effective. But I struggle with the idea, though, that um, the best way to to help these democratic values is to do something like this, right? Like that's it's a hard one for me. It's
Oh, you
interesting
mean
because
like the apprehension itself? Yeah, that can still be
yeah, like I
debated.
think
I'm
that's
just
a
saying,
little
like, if you just take him out of the
Oh yeah, yeah,
equation,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, for sure, absolutely. But I guess what I would say is like there are countries that have suffered under dictatorial or tyrannical rule for a long period of time, but they have turned themselves around, and eventually that person passes away, or eventually they have a whatever, and then they get into a much more democratic situation, right? And I think so I get nervous when stuff happens because you see it in history a lot, right? Where they're like, well, this guy's really bad. Let's get him out of the way. But then there's this vacuum. And then what happens next? And everything is
yeah,
sort of in shambles and people have to pick that up again. I think if I were to take the standard sort of Stoic idea of like personal responsibility, just go with me on this one for a second, because I've been noodling this since probably when I got your text message at 6 o'clock yesterday morning, right? um for me it's like, isn't it more resistant to falling apart later? Isn't it more resilient to have people take that responsibility and say, you know what, we're going to deal with this ourselves, right? That doesn't mean like, and I'm not commenting on anything modern, I just mean in general, like, you know I think it's important for a people to take some responsibility and do some things themselves. Now, I understand it's difficult in the modern day with like assault weapons and tanks and helicopters and terrible things like that, but I've always struggled as a student of history with the idea of just sort of plucking the head off the snake, and then it's like, well then what, I don't know that that's really going to create the real change that people are looking for. Now my hope with I'll say what I do hope for Venezuela now is that um, if they're given the opportunity, they can turn this around for themselves. Obviously, as you said,
yes,
democratically, they were already on the side of like, we need a change. Totally get
oh
it.
yeah, yeah.
And that's what I would hope for them, right? But I get nervous in history where leaders have been installed or removed by some outside party, and there's many countries that have done this. It's not
Well,
specific.
that's anti-democratic, right? I mean, if you're just
I totally
installing a
agree.
leader, so that's why I
I
think
totally agree.
I think
Uh,
what would be the Stoic idea of cosmopolis today would be
Yeah.
democratic countries joining together to promote democratic countries or countries that are trying to be democratic,
Yes.
human rights around the world. It doesn't mean the neocon version of that would be, military intervention to create a Jeffersonian democracy in Iraq, for example. That's not
Right.
going to work. That's not going to work. So I agree with that. But
Yeah.
I do think that what the Stoic philosophy would entail would be engagement for sure, right? It's not
Yeah.
isolationism, but the engagement would be to develop developing countries to a point where they're on their own 2 feet,
Yes.
and they can become a trading partner with you. That's a benefit, and that
Yes.
they have
Yeah.
free and democratic societies, which are going to be not only better for the people. I mean, we want to be in a democratic society. Why wouldn't we want
Yes.
other people to be? But also,
Yeah.
they're going to be more aligned with us. So you can also look at it as a positive when you're looking at the way the world is now. It's clearly multipolar. You
Hmm.
want people on your side. The other thing is you want allies. Like
Yes.
the United States needs Canada. Canada needs the United States.
Hmm.
We would be better off together instead of, the
Agreed.
current whatever.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
an example because I'm looking at me and you. But
Oh,
that,
yeah, I know.
yeah,
We'll always be friends, Mick, don't worry.
yeah, I know. But it's like the idea that we want less allies is
Yeah.
also uh, it falls against the concept of cosmopolitanism,
Yes, absolutely.
cosmopolis, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah,
We should
because when you look
develop a system of democratic countries that are aligned with each other to promote each other.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. And there's a great example of this, right? Which is Marcus. Marcus has there's a coup in I think it's somewhere in the Middle East at the time, and I apologize for not remembering all the names, but there's a coup where like this person declares themselves like emperor of the Eastern Empire or whatever. I can't remember what it is exactly, but Marcus reaches out to this person and says like, look, you know, this is
I
this is
remember
fine.
that.
Let's
Yeah.
let's work through this, right? And in fact, he actually says to the Senate, he says, "Hey, if you want me to, I'll abdicate and he can take over as emperor, right? And then there's also the magnanimity he has towards all of this new emperor's generals, where he says everybody else is, it's okay. You guys are all sort of pardoned or whatever. And then what's really funny is that he actually mourns what happens, because the troops get fed up with this new emperor, and they actually cut his head off and then send it to Marcus. And Marcus actually weeps for this man and says, he's like, I didn't. That's not what I wanted to happen. I
Hmm.
just wanted everything to kind of go back to being copacetic, right?
Right.
And I think that's a really interesting take on all of this, right? Because in some ways, I think Marcus would have said, "Well, look, if they feel like they're better off in that way, then let them be better off that way. We'll set up a treaty; it'll be fine. Like I don't need to send all this." He did send troops over because they were invading other parts of the empire. But I think there's an interesting magnanimity there, where what the lesson I always take away from that one, right? And look, you and I, we work with other human beings, and I've definitely clashed with people sometimes, and I'm sure that you have in your past. But there's the difference between like clashing, but you maintain the respect and you see them as human beings, and they don't become nemesis, right? And I
Hmm.
think we have to look at that. So when you talk about wanting more allies, wanting all of that, like, yeah, sure. Like I might not agree with somebody's leadership of another country, but I don't wish that person ill, right? But anyways, this is a really tough thing, because I think Stoics are it would be easy, and it's sort of been misused, I think, in history, the idea that with stoicism, or with the idea of cardinal virtues, which are exist in stoicism, exist in religion, in certain religions as well, that people use that as a way of rationalizing really bad things, because they'll be like, or if it's really bad, they'll be like, somebody on a hilltop just like shooting a bazooka and just being like, freedom, I'm giving you freedom, right? And it's like, okay, well, that's a really bad way to do this. Like, just because you believe in these four virtues doesn't mean everybody else has to. But you need to treat people with your ethos, which is actually another episode I would like to suggest that you and I do, about having a personal ethos. But I think that's what Cato struggled with, actually, was he was like, look, I cannot disagree ever with this idea that we need to have a democratic process. And so I bounced around a
But
bit there. But ultimately, I think
yeah,
that's the key thing for me with all of this kind of thing. I struggle with the idea of any kind of military intervention of any kind, because I think the people have to do it themselves. But that's probably my idealistic,
it is
way.
idealistic. Not there's anything wrong with that, but there is a component that you have to be ready to fight for yourself,
Yeah,
right? Because
agreed.
freedom isn't free. I mean,
Yeah,
that's a cliche, but
I
real.
believe
It's
it.
real. It's real, right? So
Yeah,
I'm obviously a critic of the Iraq War. Maybe not obviously, but I am. But I have to say, I saw an aspect of it that perfectly depicts
mm,
a group that was willing to fight for itself for its independence, and that was the Kurds I already referenced, right? So
yes,
we actually, and this is a true story. I don't tell false ones, but we were planning an operation in northern Iraq. It was a big
yeah,
terrorist organization that had controlled a bunch of. It was like literally running up the Alps to fight. It was a bear. But anyway, we're planning this all out. So we're in this giant room, mostly Kurds and a few Americans,
yeah.
and we're waiting for somebody to show up. So we had the projector that we're showing you go here, we go there, and we're gonna, all that
Mhm.
military, big arrow stuff. And so we didn't have anything else. So we had one movie, and we put play. It was Braveheart.
Okay.
Okay. So
Okay.
it's obviously the Scots fighting for their own independence
I'll give
from,
you that. Yep. Absolutely.
a brutal king. So at first nobody was watching it, right? They're just talking and looking over maps, and then that speech, man, that speech when he's
Yeah.
with the horse and he's running and he's talking freedom, everybody stopped and everybody looked, and I
Yeah.
could see in their faces they were like, "Oh man, that's us." Like right after
Mhm.
we finish fighting these terrorists, we got to fight Saddam,
Mhm.
a brutal dictator who tried to annihilate him, tried to exterminate him, literally used
Yeah.
chemical weapons in
Yeah.
Halabja up in northern Iraq and killed a lot. But they could see it on their faces. They're like, "This is our moment. This is our, you know,
Yeah.
William Wallace moment." And then and they heard the chant freedom because
Yeah.
they like freedom. They never take our freedom, right?
Yeah.
So your hair standing up and you got a tear coming down your eye. And then we get out to the battlefield and we start going. I hear them, and they don't speak English. A lot of them, they start yelling freedom, right?
Oh
Like
yeah.
screaming it. It was like holy rack. So I don't think that justifies the entire $1 trillion and thousands of lives that
No,
we
I
spent.
yeah.
But I'm just
But
highlighting that. Look, we're lucky in places like Canada and the United States. We
mhm.
generally don't have a threat to our freedom.
Right.
But I would also caution that you have to be ready to fight for it. Because
Yeah.
if you're not, it's not a given that your kids will have it or your grandkids will have it. So
Yeah.
the one thing about Stoicism, and it's always been a part of it, is
Yeah.
we're not pushovers
No.
at
Well, I
all.
think there's no, I know,
Right?
and I
So
think
it's
there's
we might be idealistic, but we're not pushovers. We've got to be ready to defend our what we believe in and our.
we do, and I think that defense comes in many forms, right? Like, we were with the like I actually do believe in the idea that freedom isn't free. I do believe that there's a cost there. I just think for me, it's I think generally different than what some people think. Because some people, freedom isn't free, so therefore I will bear arms, and that's across many countries in the world. I'm not picking on one. But then on the flip
Yeah,
side,
you
right,
are.
I'm the one who believes that the cost is vigilance in some way, shape, or form. Vigilance by educating people, right, about
Sure.
the values that you want, educating people about the political structure that works and all of these things, educating people to think for themselves, think rationally, right? It's vigilance to vote, right? Vote for the candidate you want. Don't vote because in Ontario, there's always that chant. There's a chant. That's province I live in Canada. There's a chant about so many people they voted so they could get buck a beer, like dollar beer in the beer stores, and you're like, Jesus Christ, like,
That's a thing
are
in
you
Canada?
kidding me? Yeah. Yes. Don't. Yeah. Let's not even go there. I could go on an hour rant on just that, right? And they were voting against their best interests because the party that came in were like, let's dismantle hospitals, and you're like, oh great. So you have a dollar beer in the beer store, but you don't have working hospitals, and the schools are crumbling, right?
So
And so
participation, I would agree, is part of
yeah,
what a good
I-
Stoic would do for his country, but
well,
also being willing to
absolutely,
stand and toe the line, so to speak.
absolutely,
Not to promote it, not to want to do it,
right,
but be prepared to do it.
right. But let's look at that vigilance from one perspective, and I think taking this back to the colonial side of it, right? Like for me, I don't think you can have it two ways. I don't think you can be a major promoter of democracy
Mhm.
and things, actual democracy and actual like legislative process of the democratic countries of the world. I don't think it's easy to say I am pro democracy, pro people voting, pro vote by the people, and then there's a military, and then there are military interventions or military takeovers. I really struggle with that because I think
Yeah.
if the cost is vigilance, the vigilance is you've got to stick to that ethos, which I said earlier. I think we need to do an episode on that because it's not about people should be my ethos or your ethos or the Xeno's ethos. It's like you have to have an ethos that you stick to, and no matter what. And that vigilance in many cases is like, whether it's the peaceful transition of power, right? Whether it's you know elect leadership through elected means, right? Whatever it is, if you believe in that, like I don't think you can have it both ways. And the vigilance is that no matter what, I think you can't do it because it'd be easy for people to say, well, the ends justify the means, right? And it's like, well, we got rid of a bad person, or we helped a country that was really struggling by enforcing ourselves on it. And I'm just like, I don't think that works that way. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah. So I think that's been in part the fallacy of colonialism. We
Hmm.
had to do it for their own good, right? Whether
Yeah.
it's bringing
Oh, totally.
Christianity so the savages go to
Yeah.
heaven, which I don't
I,
think had anything to, maybe some priests, of course, believe that, but I
Yes.
think the powers that be just used it, right? I mean,
Yeah. Absolutely.
so, but what I'm talking about being willing to stand up for, the easiest example would be Ukraine right now,
Mm.
right? So Ukraine is a democratic country that's been invaded by an autocratic country, and it's trying to be taken over. To be
Yeah.
quite frank, if Europe would have followed the model I'm promoting, which is be ready to defend yourself at all times,
Right.
he likely wouldn't have done it.
Right.
Okay, Europe has basically ignored its own security for decades, like
Right.
decades. They said we got U.S. as the big brother, and I'm pro Europe, by the way, just for the record.
Yeah.
I think
Well,
they're
I grew up there. So,
the most significant, security partner we have. So
hmm,
totally disagree with the current national security strategy. But I'm also laying out the facts.
yeah.
I mean, there's militaries um, in Europe, countries in Europe that literally half of the National Guard of one state in the United States could defeat.
Right.
They literally can't even deploy,
Right.
right? So if you say, well, I think everybody should be like that, except for the autocratic country that's next to you, that's wrong.
Yeah. You're walking into
You're
something.
gonna you're gonna actually promote, not that you actually endorse it,
Right.
things like the invasion of a country in Europe.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
what I'm saying is, you want to be, you as a democratic country and your allies need to present a formidable defense, so
Right.
much so that wars don't start. If you think,
Yeah.
well, I am friendly to everybody and I would never think about taking over anybody else's stuff, that doesn't necessarily apply to the person that's standing next to you. So you
Right.
have to be, as Stoics and as democracies, we have to be willing to present such a formidable force that other places like Russia, or now China has encircled Taiwan,
Hmm.
right? Taiwan is
Yeah.
a democracy. Taiwan is as an ally to Canada
Right.
and the United States. They're now
Hmm.
completely encircled with a military exercise.
Right.
You see what I mean?
Yes,
So
I do.
you have to treat the world as it is, not the way you want it to be. Is another aspect of. I know we're getting a little off colonialism,
No, no, but I think
but
no, but I think that's actually the core of what we're really getting to, right? Like a Stoic's not. I think you and I might both say that a Stoic would never be okay with the colonialism mindset, right?
right,
Like
yes,
if you have people living next to you and they're doing bad things, right? And not even they haven't invaded you yet, but if they're doing bad things, right, you do that forward defense activity, I think, as they call it, right? And the Romans were very famous for this, right, where they would like
right.
they would put an extra 10,000 centurions, like in I don't know
Oh yeah,
somewhere, and then right on the border, and they would say done, right? But and I think that's really important to kind of keep in mind is like that I don't think a Stoic would disagree with that, but I think what you and I are probably both talking about is something more along the lines of like um, that's just because you're protecting people. You're setting up a good like it is safety, it is all of those things. You got to
hmm
do it for the right reasons though. If you're doing your forward defense because you're just about to take over their diamond mines or something like that, like
oh yeah. That's just
that's
exploitation, right? That is
absolutely just
neo-colonialism. Whether it's rare earth minerals, oil,
yeah.
right? Um,
Yeah. And but that vigilance, I think what you're talking about is another form of vigilance. But I think it's interesting because I feel like it's okay for me to be okay with doing what you're saying about having strong militaries and strong presence as long as it's a defense mindset. If you start like if you're the one picking fights, like I'm sorry, that doesn't jive with my personal worldview on it. Vigilance
sure.
is doing the right things and always doing the right things, and you got to keep it up. And it's I feel like in some ways people are tired right now because it's just like, oh, this guy's doing this, and there's another
I
thing over here
know.
and a war over there. God, it feels. You and I were talking yesterday to close this out. You and I were talking yesterday, and I said to you, man, I'm really feel like I'm being affected by today's events, and you said something like a lot of people are telling me that, and it's just like, yeah, this is a tough one.
Yeah, it
But
was the press conference that really got to a lot of people. Before then, they were
yeah,
like, "Huh, bad dude, arrested." Okay.
yeah,
I mean, not that everybody was like that, but then the press conference, like, what? The
I know.
U.S. I mean, the U.S. has a $31 trillion economy. The next
Hmm.
largest economy is China. It's 20 trillion, right?
Right.
And we're worried about oil in a developing country.
Yeah.
I mean, that is neocolonialism, right? So anyway, and yes, I understand that the government just to be fair to both sides, the government of Venezuela took over what the infrastructure that American companies had done. So they're actually owed billions, for the
Mhm.
record. That's a legal judgment. It's not
Okay.
just right.
Yeah.
But
Sure.
that's not what they said. They could have said that. Like, we need to make sure that, Exxon or Chevron or whoever the hell, because
Right.
that's also fair in business practices. But I think the concept that it's now okay to take over a country to exploit it is going back to colonialism. And the
Mhm.
other time this came up, interesting enough, I was, we go to movies when we're together with my family on Christmas.
Yeah.
We went to see Avatar 3. If you haven't
Okay.
seen that, it's pretty good. I think it's better than the other two, to be frank.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Really?
it's some pretty compelling scenes, but you can't help
Right.
but look at it and go, the concept, of course,
Mm-hmm.
is going to this planet with the blue people and exploiting their resources.
Resources, yes.
I mean, that's pure what they do, right?
Yeah.
They do a
It's
little bit of
basically
like,
Dances with Wolves in space, right?
yeah, it's the same thing. And I'm watching
Yeah.
the whole time and going, oh wow, this is what's happening right now. You might as well just change. They had a name for the substance that they're after, but you might as well just change
Oh,
it, the
it's
name to rare earth.
I know the name. It's unobtainium. I was like, that's funny.
That is funny.
Yeah,
That is funny.
but I get
But
it.
yeah,
And
it's a clear right. They're indigenous people. They're
yeah.
primitive lifestyle. They don't have
Mhm.
weapons. It was just like when the
Yeah.
Spanish landed in South America.
Yeah. And you know what? I think, this is a good place to close though, where it's like there are so many parallels throughout history. And, media tries to talk about it. And like I said, Dances with Wolves or Dances with Wolves in Space. I mean, I think, for us as Stoics, we have to be vigilant. We have to do what we think is right. We have
Mhm.
virtues for a reason, right? And we have to live according to nature as we think. And if I don't think nature is us imposing things on others. But at the same time, there is no easy answer to any of these things. So we'd love to hear from the people out there. Obviously, it's an interesting time. Let's put it that way. But yeah, we should wrap up there because I know
Yes.
Mick's got some media to do, and I've got some editing to do. But Mick, thank you for the episode today, for the conversation. If there's any closing thought you want to add before we wrap up.
I think ultimately what we're saying is the opposite of colonialism and tribalism. And by the way, I'm writing a paper on tribalism and Stoicism.
Mhm. Okay.
Is cosmopolitanism,
Yeah.
right? And that is the Stoic concept, and it is different. And the more people who adhere to it, the better off we all will be.
Yeah. Totally agree. Well, thanks everybody for listening. We will catch everyone in the next one. Cheers, Mick.
All right. Cheers. Thank you for listening to the Pup and Porch podcast. If you'd like to find out more about the podcast or its host, head over to pupandporch.com, and you can listen to all our episodes on Spotify, Apple, or whichever platform you prefer. And if you'd like to help out with the podcast, you can find us on Patreon. Drop us an email if you have a comment on any past episode, you have a suggestion for future episodes, or you have an essay on an important topic for Stoicism. Send it to us, and then we can be reached at info@pupandporch.com. Today's music was provided by bensound.com. Until next time, Pup and Porch out.